Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with a brand new TNG release. It has been a little while since we had a new TNG figure come out, so I am over the moon excited about this one because I just completely adore TNG, and specifically I adore their prehistoric mammals. I think their prehistoric mammals are some of the best that you are going to find on the market anywhere, with really only Eofauna and Collectae kind of competing with them, I would say. Other than that, most other companies for some reason just ignore prehistoric mammals in general, but then you have other companies like Earth Story and stuff releasing some recently that are pretty decent, but not quite the quality of TNG. So as far as the box art goes, you can see, of course, a nice shot of the Megatherium here on the front, as well as the TNG logo. You can see the TNG logo up here on the top, and then some information over here on the side, and same thing over here, and then basically the mirror image on the opposing side. So let's go ahead, pop the box open, and check it out. So here is our Megatherium, and at first glance you can see it looks pretty darn nice, especially when it comes to the colors. I think the colors are quite nicely done overall, because there's a good bit of variation of all sorts of different shades of browns, from light browns to super dark browns to reddish browns throughout the majority of the figure. The colors on this one, definitely help to add some life to the model overall. And I also think that the fine detail looks really good. The fur detail is extremely crisp and really pops on the sculpt, which, I expect no less when it comes to TNG. They've also got a pretty cool pose. I know not everybody is a big fan of the tongue extending out, as the original prototype had shown off no tongue, and then they went, I guess, back and re-edited the figure to give it the tongue extending out. I don't really mind the tongue sticking out. I don't really think it makes a huge difference for me whether the tongue is in the mouth or out of the mouth. It looks nice as far as that goes either way. I think the detailing as well looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and actually jump to a closer look at this one. We'll readjust the camera here. So bringing our Megatherium up to take a look at it, you can see the head sculpt looks pretty decent. You've got some really dark browns here in the face, moving up into the nose and everything along the snout. You also have a little shade of a pinkish tone there on the nose of the Megatherium. You can see the nostrils sculpted as well. Also have a little bit of that pinkish tone inside the nostrils. We can see the tongue, of course, extending out, which we already said, and that does have the same pinkish tone that we see on the nose for the inside of the mouth. It also has a nice gloss coat, which is a plus for the figure, helping to add a little bit of a saliva-like look to the inside of the mouth. The eye looks okay right here. It's basically given like a light brown and then a black pupil, but I think the eye looks nicer as far as the paintwork goes on the other side. Definitely looks a bit more lifelike over here. The sculpt, again, looks really good when it comes to the fine detail. We have all sorts of really fine fur that definitely is going to pick up as we move through the figure. You can see the ears sculpted out as well. Again, all sorts of variations to the brownish tones, like these reddish browns that you sort of see up here in the head, but then as you move down, you even have like yellowish tan sort of tones here that are dry brushed over. As we move back into the body, you can see that the fur again definitely picks up, especially right here in the neck. Like, it gets really quite thick and wavy as you move back into the neck. The fur is also, again, highlighted for the most part with that same sort of yellowish tone, like a yellowish tan or a yellowish brown. I don't know how you would term that. And some areas I think it looks a little bit much, like right here. I think it just looks a little bit much. But then as you move back into the stomach, I think it looks nicer as far as its application. So it's, a little hit or miss as far as that goes. But the waviness of the fur looks really good, especially up here in the neck. And again, how thick it is. And you can almost see a little bit of like wrinkling going on because the Megatherium is turning its head a little bit. So I quite like that as well. And as you move back here a little bit further, you can sort of make out like the shoulders and stuff, and definitely see how impressively large the arm here of our Megatherium is. You can also get a nice sense of the musculature of the arm as you move down. You've got some really kind of shaggy, wavy fur leading off of the bottom of the arm, basically in like the elbow area as you move along. And as you lead down into the hands, you can see we again have a slightly different shade of brown. Focus camera for the hands. This hand has the fingers curled under it, whereas this hand over here has the fingers extended. Now this is where we run into, in my opinion, the biggest problem for this figure. Now usually TNG, in my opinion, does a pretty darn good job on their prehistoric mammals and really quite captures the accuracy department of most of the mammals they make, but this time not so much, because we definitely have so many claws on this, way more than you should see for a Megatherium. It's much closer to the Megatherium more so than a Megatherium. Megatherium should only have 3 claws, whereas on this figure you can see, if my camera focuses, there you can see 5 claws on this figure, which is definitely unfortunate. So the digits and everything, and of course the amount of claws and all that, the entire hand area is basically wrong for being a Megatherium, which is definitely unfortunate. And I think that's probably the biggest setback for this figure specifically, because otherwise I think it looks really nice for the most part from what I've seen, but that's like a glaring error, like kind of just staring you right in the face, especially when they have the hand, you know, held up here in the air so high. It's just like, it's almost saying, look at me, look at this error that we put on the figure. So a little bit of a downside, pretty big downside, I would say, as far as that goes for this figure. But as you move into the undersides of the hands, like you can see the skin texture and everything in the hands looks really nice. Even the palms of the hands looks pretty nice. Another thing I'm not a huge fan of, actually, as far as the hand area goes, is the way that they painted the nails, because it just looks a little bit sloppy to me as far as the way they've basically given it like that dark brown and then dry brushed this like tan tone. Actually looks like maybe the same tan that they've used on the fur over the claws, and they just basically applied it kind of sloppily. I also think that the nails looked better on the original prototype, because when they'd first shown this off, the nails looked more genuinely sharp, whereas now they are much more rounded than they used to be. And they also, I feel like they should be a bit larger, kind of, than what we see here, as the Megatherium did have some pretty big claws, and that definitely, they don't look huge, but I feel like they would be a little bit bigger. But as you move back into the body, you can see again the fur kind of nicely highlighted as far as the dry brushing technique they've used. You can also see some pretty significant girth to the stomach region of the Megatherium, as well as some wrinkling right here as this leg is kind of pushing up into the stomach, which is again a very nice minute detail that I think adds some nice realism to the figure. As you move up here, you can really nicely see how they've elaborated the fur quite beautifully, moving through the majority of the figure. You'll also again see some of the darker browns picking up and stuff, especially as you lead out here into the tail. As you lead down, you can see some darker fur following along the lower part of the body. You can also see that the fur kind of hangs off of the tail really nicely, which I also quite enjoy. Definitely some very nice paintwork on this one. As you move over to the opposing side, for the most part, the feet are kind of planted down, and you can see the tail. Everything here, as far as that goes, is kind of similar to the way we see it on the other side, maybe just slightly different in position. Obviously, as we move up through the figure, though, you will see that this arm is in quite a bit of different position compared to what we saw on the other side, giving us a little bit of a better visual, I would say, of the stomach, and also, again, all of the different variation of color you see throughout the majority of this figure. And obviously, we can see the musculature, again, kind of shown off, even though it's, you know, for the most part obscured with the fur. You can kind of see that, and again, just how strong that arm looks, and also all of the wavy, shaggy fur leading off of the arm as you lead out. And then as you lead down here through the underbelly, you can see pretty much the same style of paint and sculpt and everything through the entire underside of the figure, leading all the way under the tail. And you can also see the undersides of the feet are quite nicely sculpted as far as the focus, there we go, as far as the skin texture, and again, the brownish tones. But like I said, the nails do look a little bit sloppy. And I do actually remember somebody stating that the feet might be incorrect, but I don't know for sure. I'm not super familiar with how the feet of a Megatherium would look, but I don't know. Again, I can't really comment for sure as far as accuracy goes on the feet, but I do remember somebody somewhere, I don't remember where I saw it, but somebody at some point stating that they thought that the feet were incorrect as far as the way it looks. But I could be wrong, or they could be wrong, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. But otherwise, again, I think it's a pretty cool looking version of a Megatherium with some very obvious inaccuracies. As far as a size goes, actually, for the absolute most length, I guess we should go to the front of the front leg there. So for a length, you are looking at from the tail to the hand about 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters. And then for a height, about 3.25 inches, maybe slightly over, or around 8.5 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, Robert Muldoon, and the Collect Day Human Being next to our TNG Megatherium. And as you can see, it's got a pretty decent size to it. It's not overly huge or anything by any means, but definitely has a nice size to it. And for another comparison to further show you that, I have the comparison that I think most people would probably want to see with the Safari Ltd version of the Megatherium next to the TNG version, and as you can see, the TNG version is obviously significantly larger than our older Safari Ltd release. So if you are looking for a larger version, you could definitely go with the TNG version, but if you're looking for a more accurate version, you might want to stick with the Safari Ltd release. Now, unfortunately, there aren't all that many Megatherium figures out there. I know there is a Schleich version, which I don't think I actually have. I have to get my hands on at some point. There is also a Bullyland version, which I do believe I have, but would be in storage. And, again, there's also smaller ones like the Kyoto version, but, like, that's not really going to compare well with this one. And I can't really think of too many others off the top of my head that would be, like, you know, more mass-produced models that many people might have. There's also, like, I do have the Passion Charger version, but again, that's not something that very many people are going to have, so it's not going to be a good piece to bring in for a comparison. So we'll just bring in some more TNG mammals, I think, as we have the woolly mammoth, which you can see is a bit larger than our Megatherium. There is also the TNG Elasmotherium and Megatherium here next to each other, which these two are actually kind of similar in size. We also have the TNG Megacerops, which as we can see is definitely a bit smaller, as well as the TNG Smilodon, which we can very clearly see is also a bit smaller. And then just a few random comparisons. We've got the Schleich Diabloceratops, which is a little bit smaller. The Collect Day Deluxe Dimetrodon, which is kind of similar in size, just a bit more height with that sail. The Safari Ltd Utyrannus, which as expected is a little bit smaller. Also a Mattel Velociraptor, another very common figure that many people might have in their collections. So this brand new TNG Megatherium is definitely a really fun figure, but doesn't come without some flaws. Again, the inaccuracies are probably not super obvious to everybody, but once they're pointed out, I feel like they become, you know, like just super obvious and a little upsetting. But like I said earlier, you can look at it as being maybe like a Aramatherium or something like that, and you know, look at it through a different light, and then maybe it becomes more appealing. But either way, it is still a pretty darn nice looking figure, and TNG always delivers fairly decent quality prehistoric mammals, especially when it comes to the sculpt quality as well as the paint, and I think this has all of that going on. The fine detail is extremely impressive. It is also extremely vibrant, so that is definitely a huge plus for this release, and the paint apps on this one are probably some of the nicest outside of the painted nails, but are probably some of the nicest I've seen from TNG as far as variation of color. This one has just a ton of different shades of browns throughout, as well as some nice dry brushing techniques helping to highlight the fur detail and show off how impressive the fine detail of the figure is. And I think TNG overall did a great job as far as that goes. So definitely a very nice looking figure as far as the fine detail and paint apps. Again, a little bit of a downside as far as some inaccuracies, but it's still a pretty fun figure, and I would recommend picking it up. So if you are interested, I will include a link in the description to where you can do that through Lana Time Shop, because that is exactly where I purchased mine. So make sure you do that, and of course, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.